Ah yes, the beginning of yet another invigorating day at the gastroenterology unit of UAC Medical. I hear they've got a troublesome patient down in the basement, but I'm sure the guys know what to do. Not at all concerning that they handed me a standard issue pistol at the start of my shift, but anyway, let's check in with the guys and see what's going. Oh, we got demons all up in that business. More specifically, ass demons. Well, I guess this is as good a time as any to do the rounds, check in on the patient, make sure everything is hunky-dory. We got spillage. I'm breaking out the goddamn medical chainsaw for this one. Anyway, how's our patient doing? Hopefully the procedure is... good grief. It just keeps going. How much ass is in there? So yes, welcome to Cy's Freaky Colonoscopy, a map set that takes us on a journey, a fantastic voyage, if you will, into the lower reaches of everyone's favorite demonic adversary. If I had to describe it in a nutshell, it's like that one episode of Futurama where Fry gets worms, only instead of improving his body in every conceivable way, this particular infestation is instead causing horrendous degrees of screaming agony. Though, how much of that is the demons and how much of that is the tube being forcibly inserted up of its backside remains to be seen. Speaking of said tube, welcome, we're now inside of it, and this is the gaping Cyberdemon asshole. Monetization? Never heard of it. I think it's well worth mentioning at this point that you should probably throw any preconceived notions about how the lower reaches of a Cyberdemon's colon are supposed to operate just straight out the window, because that will not help you here. Instead, strap yourself in for a wild ride across 11 or so levels of what I would normally describe as flesh tech themed levels, but instead, let's just call it butt tech. As you may or may not have already noticed, the enemies that we're dealing with down here, while largely vanilla in behavior, do have some interesting visual tweaks to them. The pinkies, for example, have greenish horns, chain gunners have green skin, and I guess that's to denote their more infectious demonic nature. We've also got the inclusion of some exploding balls from Heretic, and these have a very interesting tweak in the regard that when they explode, they'll also send what looks like a Hell Knight projectile hurtling in your general direction, causing you to just be a tad more wary when it comes to setting off explosive barrels in their presence. As for the skybox, don't think about it too hard. Seriously, don't think about it too hard. As for the more unique inclusions, there's some stationary hostile units, fleshy piles that can throw what looks like cacodemon projectiles in your general direction. Those become quite troublesome later on down the line. And we've also got these fellas, which I'm reliably informed are called Big Heads, from a game called In Pursuit of Greed, something that dredges up hazy memories of dusty shareware demo discs, but that's a story for another time. As far as opening levels go, this is a fine introduction to the theme as far as journeying up a Cyberdemon's backside goes, and ends with this neat little blood elevator section facing you off against a barren and limited space, and then further ramping up the tension with a host of troublesome lost souls. Get out of here! Go on! Get! The first thought that enters my mind for follow-up level, if it's yellow, is funky. The second thought is, oh shit, I'm on fire, because this swiftly introduces you to a setup involving a archvile on a raising and lowering platform that you, quite frankly, do not have enough ammo to deal with, instead forcing you to rely on the Berserker Pack to deal with the more reachable enemies in the immediate area. After dealing with the riffraff in a few adjoining corridors, you'll find yourself unceremoniously spat out via teleporter into this. This made my eyes hurt. There was just so much shit going on, and in that same regard, represents a fairly significant difficulty spike during the course of this level. It's a smorgasbord of enemy types, from chain gunners to arachnotrons to pain elementals to cacos. It's not a nice combination of things to deal with, quite frankly, in an open space such as this with multiple sight lines and elevations.
Nice.
And I was all the more happy to be done and dusted with it, leading us neatly back to the opening area. Cashing in that hard-won yellow skull card will grant us access to a switch, and finally grant us the ability to deal with that pesky Archvile. Only, he's not on the platform. Surprise, bitches! Archie ain't gonna let you deal with it that easily. Of course he's gonna be part of the end-level horde. Deal with it. Gotta love the odd inclusion of just the random UAC scientist that's found themselves stranded up this Cyberdemon's backside. You'll find them across multiple levels here, clearly just too fascinated by the various bodily fluids sloshing about in here to even entertain saying hello. Douchebags. Anyway, from here on out, I'll be touching on a brief selection of levels overall from this map set, because if I covered every one of them, I'd be here all goddamn day. But one such map that certainly stuck in the mind was the likes of Baphometic Butt Cramp. Not because of the title alone, but because of the indelible image of a grey Cyberdemon body topped off with a tiny green chain gunner head. Something that I unfortunately failed to realize at first, however, was that this map was largely going to be centered around the idea of telefragging such enemies. So yeah, you see this right here? Thorough waste of ammunition. Ammunition, I might add, that is much better used in service of dealing with something such as this spider mastermind, but regarding my previous idiocy, I just had to run for it like a scared little bitch boy. All in all, it's an oddly cavernous level. Lots of wide open space, but not a lot of stuff used to actually fill it in. And I can't help but feel that there's just a few instances of miscommunication between the level and the player. This section here for the blue skull key certainly springs to mind. Peeking around the corner will reveal a room full of barrels and a roving chain demon cyber gunner? One of those two. And my instinct was to blow up the barrels, but clearly that's not enough to kill it, so I was plugging away like an idiot with my SSG, not realizing that I could just go pick up the blue skull key and watch those crushing pillars come down and help me out instead. It's a nice idea. I just feel like some elements of the execution could have been, finessed a little. If anything, it's a good case study in how designing around a gimmick is nice and all, but it also helps if you can surround that gimmick with equally interesting stuff. On the subject of gimmick levels, we've also got the runs. No, we don't need to take some medication, that's the name of the level. This is a really neat idea that has you following trails of ammunition and health items on a, quite frankly, madcap dash through the lower reaches of wherever the heck this is at this point in the Cyberdemon's backside. And trust me, slowing down, or even stopping for that matter, is not an option. There's even a disclaimer before this level telling you to just keep running. And for good reason. These are absolutely monster-infested hallways, and for the most part, you'll be traversing over hurt floors, your health ticking down every moment that you're present. Granted, a little bit of respite does appear in the form of a rad suit that'll prevent you taking damage, but that shouldn't be taken as an excuse to stop and smell the fecal matter. Instead, you'll find that you'll have to do multiple laps of these hallways, often having to re-encounter those groups of enemies that you skillfully skimmed past previously. And overall, just turns out to be a fun, fast, and frantic little ride that acts as a neat little palate cleanser between some of the more substantial levels here. Speaking of substantial, Cyb's freaky colonoscopy has its fair share of chunky levels during its runtime, and I'd say Lumbar here certainly fits that particular bill. Introducing you to this wide, open, chaotic space right from the word go, it simply asks you to deal with it. Dodge those projectiles, get busy blasting things in the face, and when it comes to the subject of where exactly you should be heading first, you don't need to worry about it too much. Just keep killing enemies and keep heading in any given direction, and you're sure to find your way. When it comes down to it, I find designs such as this quite impressive. The kind of stuff that gives off the initial impression that you're going to have a hard time and you're going to get lost relatively quick, but makes the progression actually feel relatively smooth and effortless. It also helps that it functions around heading towards an objective of sort. You'll note at the start of the level that you're pretty much being bombarded from afar by those stationary projectile-chucking enemy flesh lumps, and the bulk of this level involves journeying to the location and putting a stop to their bombardment. For those of you wondering whether they're killable, I'm not entirely sure, and even if they are, I wouldn't say it'd be worth the waste of ammo. For saying that any given direction works during the course of this level, I would say there is potentially a path of least resistance. One does require you to visit this side area first in order to acquire the yellow key, but then you should be stocked up well enough on ammunition and weaponry in order to deal with whatever it's gonna chuck at you. In this case, a hefty dose of piss-colored mancubi and, of course, our good friend, the Archvile. Taking out the rest of the flesh lump emplacement shouldn't prove too taxing, provided you observe the cardinal rules of, for example, not tanking too many goddamn projectiles to the face, being wary of shotgun ambushes, and of course, peppering any further Archvile encounters with a hefty dose of fuck you rockets. All of this leads you neatly back around to the central chamber once more, where you can then acquire the blue keycard, and then just get busy slaughtering whatever bullshit is unfortunate enough to spawn in your immediate area. In this case, some Kakos, a Pain Elemental, a smattering of Imps and Shotgunners, and of course, an Arachnotron. I appreciate too that not all of the flesh lump emplacements here are sealable, giving you something that you'd still have to be aware of when it comes to dancing around this open central area. You've still got to be aware of things peppering you from that one particular direction. But ultimately, it's a pretty smooth ride to the finish line, the blue keycard door very clearly marked in the distance, and of course, there's a little exit door surprise, just to keep you on your toes before it's time to move onwards to sights, sounds, and certainly smells anew. As with any community-based map pack, there's going to be ups and downs, good ideas, bad ideas, and Descending Carnage is a good idea that somehow manages to just endlessly piss me off. So, for starters, we've got this slowly descending elevator as an opener, taking you past multiple levels of enemies before finally reaching the bottom. But, whoops, guess what? You got a few keycards to collect, so it's back to that central pillar, but you gotta press the button to take you up one by one those various floors where you'll eventually be able to move through teleports to additional side areas. Now again, this is fine on paper, but god does this level drag itself out. This is largely because these side areas feel like they could easily be levels unto themselves, or at least feel more bolted on to the central conceit than feeling like a cohesive part of them. But this first one, not too difficult to start with, but it's an escalating sequence of enemies. Once you've dealt with this opening area of largely inconsequential former humans, you'll drop the fence and find yourself face to face with chain gunners and pinkies, and if you're not careful, you might get a rogue rocket to the face, as the fences here manage to obscure a cyber gunner somewhere off in the distance, which I gotta admit just feels like a little bit of a dick move placement wise. Oh, while I'm at it, let's not forget that behind door number 2, oh goody, a crowd of revenants. Anyway, slogging your way past all that leads you indoors, and as you can tell by my health, I was having an absolutely goddamn delightful time. Oh god, an arch-vile, just what I needed. Suck on that. Anyway, that was 1 key out of 3, and it deposits you at the bottom of the lift shaft every time. So, as you can imagine, getting progressively higher means you're going to be waiting progressively longer. If anything, the second area of this map feels somewhat like an apology for the first area, presenting you in relatively short order with an invincibility power-up, and allowing you to just go absolutely to town on a pair of Skelly Boys and the Archviles in the hallway outside. It's brief, to the point, lets you get on with business, and then there's the third area. Not to say that it gets off to a bad start, it's got quite an entertaining opening, what with these precarious fights on high ledges, which mercifully don't result in death if you fall to the ground. Instead, my troubles began when I reached the structure further along the way. There's just something about the way the encounters are put together within here that just gave me endless amounts of trouble. The Pinky Pit on the surface seems relatively straightforward to deal with, until you factor in the notion that you're suddenly taking damage from inexplicable places. It's not a hurt floor, because you can stand in other spots and not take damage. Instead, it's related to the pillars dangling over the floor, which in the heat of battle is just confusing as all heck. After muddling your way through that particular section, you may think your troubles are over and done with. And oh, hey, what a convenient looking berserker pack. Surprise, asshole, it's an archvile. Actually, yeah, just let that infight play out, yeah? No! So yeah, this section turned out to be a little bit more painful than it probably needed to be, perhaps through a combination of my own idiocy and a few of the quirks of this particular section's design, but nonetheless, I managed to muddle my way through the hordes of pinkies, through the oddly devious hurt floors, through the oddly loud blood fountain sloshing noise that inexplicably lines the outer edge of this building, and with yellow keycard in hand, I finally returned to the teleporter, cashed in my chips, and had to deal with an exit barren. If anything, there's only one thing I have left to say about Descending Carnage as a level, and that would be...
Okay, fuckity bye.
What's the procedure, everyone? What's the procedure? Stay guard!
Oh boy, you know a final level's gonna give you some serious shit when it gives you a BFG practically from the word go. This is the vibe that greets you upon starting Rumors of Tumors, a map that has practically everything stuffed into its large open arena-esque environment. The objective in this one isn't immediately clear. You may be conditioned to think that it might be an Icon of Sin type jobby, having to hunt down that elusive Romero head on a pike and deliver a few swift rockets into its mush, but no! This instead will have you frantically just strafing around the arena, dealing with groups of enemies just popping up out of the blue, before eventually noticing a few useful power-ups. Some of them will be extremely handy when it comes to keeping yourself alive long enough just to think about what you're actually supposed to be doing next here, before your eye will eventually be drawn to the blue armor power-ups next to these rather imposing looking pillars. Get close enough and, surprise asshole, enjoy your archvile. Once you've dispatched it, you'll note that inside the pillar is a switch. Clicking it does something. And I say something because at first, I'm embarrassed to admit, I completely blanked the fact that a giant writhing tumor creature had just popped out the platform immediately behind, largely in part to all of the flesh theming just utterly blinding me to their presence, and the fact that this level, up to a point, is just sheer unbridled chaos. You don't have time to stop and examine the surroundings. You're dodging projectiles, rockets, cacodemons, archviles, everything is just out to get you, and you are constantly moving. Eventually, however, a few stray projectiles did alert me to the presence of something that gave off the Icon of Sin hurt noise, and thankfully, I eventually found my targets. There's 4 of these to reveal across the map, each requiring a tangle with an archvile and flicking the requisite switch, which, as you can probably tell, gets a little tricksy when the enemies bunch themselves up just so. Thankfully, the aforementioned chaotic nature of this map means that the large number of enemies present naturally leads to a fair degree of infighting, thinning the herd out, and eventually making this much easier to deal with the longer you persist. After bringing down the 4 tumors, the last thing standing in your way is a horde of imps and a hurt floor escape route, which I've got to say managed to generate a fair bit of tension in my gut as the Soul Sphere power-up found itself strained to the very last health point before the level itself ended. Looking back, I find I quite appreciated this final level as a climactic experience. It was chaotic, fast-paced, intense, all the ingredients you need just to really get the blood pumping and really cap it off in a nice, fun, well-structured, bombastic manner. Despite airing my grievances with a few maps during the course of this video, I'd say that as a package, there are certainly more hits than misses during the course of Cyb's freaky colonoscopy, and assuredly there's a whole clutch of maps here that I unfortunately haven't had time to run through that absolutely deserve your attention. I'm certainly a fan of the theming, that much is definitely true. There's just something endlessly amusing about having an entire clutch of levels located somewhere up a Cyberdemon's asshole, and I quite enjoy how that manifests in the usage of textures throughout these maps too. Some interesting ones that I can't entirely place. I've been informed that some of them may have been inspired by Unreal textures, some from further afield, but all the same, it all works quite nicely. You are never not under the illusion that you are somewhere within a Cyberdemon's rectum at all times, even if it somehow seems to have the same spatial properties as the TARDIS. Something else I also discovered during the course of my playthrough was that if you minimize the play screen, you get a background wallpaper consisting entirely of cacodemon buttholes, and quite honestly, this is the optimal way to play. So if you're thinking of giving this a whirl for yourself, you should know that this right here, this is what peak performance looks like. Anyway, big thanks to the folks over on the Doomer boards for creating this and many other projects. Seriously, if you're stuck for levels to play, you will find an absolute wealth of creations that they've done over the years, and each covering quite varied and interesting themes. So if you feel compelled to give them a whirl for yourself, you'll find the link in the description below, not just for this particular Doomer board project, but all Doomer board projects. Have fun. In the meantime, I hope you've enjoyed this video. Feel free to let me know what you thought in the comments, and feel free to suggest anything you'd like to see me cover in future editions of Mod Madness. This has been Mr. Icarus. Thank you very much for watching. Icarus out.